Yeah, we could slash healthcare costs by 80% if we were to ask the right questions. And the biggest question we get in as patients when you come to the doctor and they said, "Hey, you're diabetic," or "Hey, you've got some autoimmune disease, maybe you've got rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease," and then you simply ask, "Why is that, doctor? Why do I have that?" And almost invariably, the answer is, "I don't know." And I think that's a reasonable answer. I mean, I don't know is a good answer in many cases, but the fact that we don't seek to know, and all we do is seek to treat, and I wouldn't even say treat, I would say medicate, is a real problem. And the fact that when you go to the doctor and you say, "Why do I have diabetes?" and they say, "Well, I don't know, maybe it's genetics, it's just bad luck," which is more often than not the answer you get, that is a real problem.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to AllSmith. Today's episode is going to be incredibly electrifying as I sit down with Dr. Shawn Baker, who's a former orthopedic surgeon, a world-class athlete, and the leading advocate for the carnivore diet. Dr. Baker has become one of the most controversial and compelling voices in the health and fitness space, challenging modern nutritional dogma, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and conventional wisdom about longevity, muscle growth, and disease prevention. I'm excited to unpack and get into the weeds with Dr. Shawn Baker. Shawn, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, appreciate you having me here. This is fun. Let's get into some stuff.
I'm excited to get into stuff, but more importantly, man, like your courage and your bravery to kind of go a little bit against the grain. I mean, you saw over the last probably 2 decades a little bit. We're starting to see at that time, everything was, we saw a little bit of grain-free, gluten-free. Then we started to see low-fat everything. And then we started to see everybody kind of moving towards this vegan diet. And when you look at the ingredient profile on so many different things, it's a chemical shitstorm. And it has so many different ingredients that we can't actually pronounce. But before we unpack that, where did your relationship with the carnivore diet kind of begin, where you started to see some of the metrics and biomarkers of like, okay, we're being pushed this information over here, but we're not really seeing it support healthier, better individuals? Where'd you generate that courage and kind of take that deep dive into your relationship with the carnivore diet?
Well, I mean, it started very personally for me. I mean, I was a guy, as you mentioned, I've been an athlete my whole life. I've always tried to perform at a high level. And I noticed somewhere in my 40s that I was I wasn't feeling good. And so I took it upon myself to really play with nutrition. And at the time, I mean, the leading advice, and still arguably what it is, eat a low fat diet, eat lots of fiber, eat lean protein, and you can lose weight and you'll be healthy. And I tried that and I did that. And to be honest, I did lose weight. I did get leaner, but I was just miserable. I mean, I was hungry all the time. I couldn't imagine a life where I'm hungry, 16 hours a day, which is just not sustainable for me. So then I kind of winded my way through this sort of low carb approach, ran into a bunch of people eating only meat. I thought it was nuts. I thought it was completely crazy. This is 10 plus years ago. But I eventually tried it myself and, it just worked really well. And so then I was really like, well, why would this work when I'm told that meat is bad for me, particularly red meat, and that fat is bad for me, particularly saturated fat, and that I had to have all these, phytonutrients from plants, and I needed all these antioxidants and all this fiber, and I didn't do any of that stuff, and I ended up in what arguably was the best shape of my life. This didn't make sense to me, and so as I explored that more and really started looking into the nutrition science, I found out that it was very lacking in many ways. And we have a lot of assumptions that have never really thoroughly been tested. And we have these, studies that we sort of cite, but when we look into them, they're not very good studies, and people will freely admit nutrition science is a very weak science in general, but it's the best we can do because of the nature of testing on humans. I mean, humans are really hard to do ethically. So we have that. And so it became, a situation where, we're like, we really don't have a good handle on what is good nutrition, to the extent that we think we do. I mean, yeah, there's some things that clearly that make us sick. And I think those things are pretty easy to find. And then as a physician, I started running into not just a few people, but at this point, thousands upon thousands of people that are putting what were otherwise deemed as incurable lifelong diseases into complete full remission and effectively curing these things, which I think is really, really kind of neat. And so that's the kind of the experience I've had in a nutshell. Obviously, it's been a long path. I mean, I've obviously ruffled some feathers. I've got some people that think I am absolutely the worst person on the planet, and conversely, I have people that think that what I've done has been tremendously beneficial for them personally. So that's the kind of the line I kind of walk, and I try to bring some level of reasonableness to this and some level of sanity to this. I mean, there's a lot of people making claims that I think, even on the good side, that can't be supported. I'm one of these guys that, I've been very conservative throughout my life, not politically, but just from believing sort of magical things, people making these claims about, I'm going to live to be 150 because I do these magical, things or take these supplements. I tend to kind of dismiss that, in many ways, because I just don't think you can make those claims.
They're big extreme reaches for sure. And I think in your case, what really aligns with me is, I think we talked about it briefly last time we connected, and that is when you observe what's going on in a primal nature within animals, the first thing that animals go after when there's a kill is organ meat. They're going after the most nutrient-dense things. They're getting things that are high in nutrient density that provide a return on investment. If you're going to put in the time, energy, and attention to make a kill or to hunt and gather, you want to get the biggest reward. And when we do this as humans with money in a world of capitalism, but when it comes to our nutrition, we're always looking for what's the fastest thing, what's just going to kind of check the box. And like it works until it doesn't work anymore. And then over the course of time, the game of consistency plays in, which it also plays in fitness. If you just are relatively consistent at 70, 80% day after day after day and keep stacking those wins across 365 days or the majority of 365 days, you start to see changes. You start to see positive health biomarkers. Same thing holds true with nutrient density, your investment into optimal nutrition. But the problem is there's so much conflicting knowledge out there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that started somewhere around the agricultural revolution, to kind of echo the famous Mark Sisson, the author of the Primal Blueprint, who kind of talks about like, dude, we had relatively lean, high-performing individuals back in the day. And then all of a sudden, as the onset of agriculture came around and man-made products and mass production of food to feel full and fill an empty space rather than provide nutrient density for the tasks that we're going to perform in the day, there was a psychological shift there that then started to be correlative to the research, the development, and the governmental suggestions. And so that's kind of a brief summary as to where my headspace is at. And I'm a little bit curious as to how you would unpack some of those variables.
Well, I mean, when you talk about agricultural revolution, we could talk about what happened, circa, post-World War II versus when we first, adopted agriculture as a human species, maybe 10, 12,000 years ago. And, 10, 12,000 years ago, prior to that, we were primarily hunter/gatherers. I would argue we were mostly hunters up to a certain point. And we saw a certain decline in overall individual human health starting around, maybe arguably 50,000 years ago, as we started to run out of our primary food supply. And we became smaller as a species. Our brain size shrunk. We became weaker. Our bone health got worse. Our dental health got worse. And then what we did, certainly post World War II, and then arguably accelerated in the 1970s, was we started to just depend upon all this ultra processed food, not just the agricultural products, but the ultra processing of those things. And that led to what we have now, which is a population of, weak, fat, depressed, dependent, psychologically broken population. And that has accelerated. And I would argue, we have this, great sort of technological stuff. I mean, the fact that we're talking, from thousands of miles away on a video is tremendous. When we've got all, and I sleep in an air conditioned and heated home. That's great. I mean, there are certain things that technology has improved, but do we need any more food? I mean, every year there are thousands of food products that are invented, whether they be supplements, whether they be the latest, blue, purple, hot pink food that's come out with these, how many, flaming hot Cheetos varieties do we need? I mean, I think we've gotten to a point where we have all the food we need probably 100 years ago, maybe even more than that. And now we've got this dependent upon patenting things, making profit out of things, venture capital, people want to put money into these latest and greatest trends just so they can earn a buck. And it's not helping us from a human health and human flourishing standpoint. And as we talked about before we jumped on, what is Robert F. Kennedy as HS Secretary going to do? How is this Make America Healthy Again movement going to actually transpire? What is it going to be changed? What can be changed? What are people willing to change? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I've got my own thoughts on some of the things that might need to happen with regard to overall health in general. I mean, there's a lot of problems there. The healthcare system, the medical system in general, the food system, the regulatory systems, they all have some really, really significant problems that have to be addressed.
Yeah, for sure. Very well said, man. I mean, the other thing that's piquing my interest right now, to echo Michael Easter's The Comfort Crisis, that's kind of where we've steered things, is, like you mentioned, the venture capital relationship into health and wellness. And the big word that seems to be a buzzword right now, in quotes underlined in bold with all exclamation points, is scalability. And we look at regenerative agriculture and the shifting and moving of cattle into different environments within farming and grazing, so they're not just hanging out in their own shit, and they're eating different things, and they're grass fed, they're grass finished, they're getting natural sunlight, they're not getting grain fed that fattens them up. But then the question becomes, does it taste good? Is it something that's scalable? Is it mass produced where we can get it to a large demographic of people to then monetize and then get it back to the investors and shareholders based on the business agreement? And that's where the complexities arise, right? Like, it feels good to take care of your health, foster deep, meaningful relationships, but it feels good to make money too. Making money is fun. It's cool. But it's also, it adds some fog. It adds some density to the complexity of what's right versus what monetizes. And it creates a heaviness within that conversation. And to add in one more construct, it's like, when you look at the healthcare system right now, they don't really want you to be healthy. They want you to be medicated so you're reliant on the system so that they can create a profit in curing disease. And it's become this $1 trillion industry of profitable care and sick care as opposed to healthcare. And you see how difficult it is in the fitness space for preventative medicine to create buy-in, because they can't just administer Ozempic and a weight loss drug that has all these side effects. You actually have to put in the work to get the result. And you mentioned dental, you mentioned muscle mass, you mentioned brain size in relation to hunter-gatherer time. Well, you actually had to be enrolled in the process of taking care of yourself and your family and protection and hunting and doing things that are hard work in order to provide and produce for your family. So when I summarize all of these things, what comes to mind for you, Dr. Shawn, around how do we bring this back into a modern day world that craves comfort, but maybe can psychologically make some better choices despite the scalability challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, as folks like Elon Musk said, in 20 years, all of us will be owning robots. They'll be doing all our menial tasks for us. They'll be washing the dishes, folding the clothes, making the beds, vacuuming the house. So what will we be free to do at that point? Will we be free to stare at an Oculus and play video games all day and turn into Wall-E people? I mean, some people will probably go down that route. But I think, when you talk about do we like comfort? But I mean, at some point, and I can tell you from the perspective of someone who's nearly 60 years of age, comfort means absence of pain. And, yes, you might be comfortable for the first 20 years not doing anything, but that's going to catch up to you. And then you're going to be uncomfortable just at rest. And that's something that, as you realize that, then it makes sense to do the things that are going to allow you to be comfortable for the rest of your life in the very basic of sense, is not being in pain
But
all the
just to
time.
bookmark you right there, like if we were to zoom out and get a clear definition of comfort, there is no comfort without discomfort. Like, you need contrast. When you look at hot, you need extreme heat in order for you to have gratitude for the air conditioning or for the cold plunge or for a cool breeze. If you're always comfortable, inevitably that becomes the new baseline, especially as you mentioned, 2 decades, 20 years. Now, like, it removes all element of gratitude. And like, once you have the thing in the bag, you're just looking for the next thing. Or at least that's my observation on the human experience. So it's like, I almost think you introduce voluntary discomfort on occasion in the pursuit of gratitude for the comfort that should come later after the hard work is put in.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the journey is just as valuable as the destination in many ways. And yeah, if there's no pain, there's no pleasure. Because it is all relative. And if your life is such that you never exert yourself, you never experience any discomfort at all, I would argue that that is almost a prison in many ways, a prison of comfort.
Agreed.
Or a prison of just, inertia in many ways. I think when you back to some of your earlier points, you talk about profit, and yes, there's nothing wrong with making money and being profitable, but at the same time, are you doing on the backs of many millions of people suffering? And I think that's where we are at this point. We have the healthcare system. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We spend close to $5 trillion a year at this point on chronic disease mostly, and we're not getting rid of chronic disease. We're, like, as you mentioned, we're just medicating people. We are providing pills, potions, and procedures to play symptomatic whack-a-mole. I mean, this is what we're doing. Symptom comes up, here's a pill. Symptom comes up, here's a test, here's a procedure. And you're not actually causing people to achieve health. I mean, the healthcare system is a, it's not an accurate term for that. And, we've heard people say it's sick care, and that's true. I mean, as a physician, many decades in this game, I remember when the term disease management came out, and I was like, what does disease management mean? I hadn't heard that term before. Well, it just means I'm going to take drugs for the rest of my life, and I'm going to manage your symptoms. And that is, I think that model is profitable. There's no doubt. There's no argument about that. It is a very profitable model, but is it the right thing to do? Clearly it's not, and I don't think that Ozempic or Zepbound or, tirzepatide or any of these, we've got these GLP-1s, and then we're going to have GLP-1s plus GIPs and GLP plus GIP plus glucagon modulators. All these drugs that are coming out, yes, they will cause people to get nauseous and lose weight and not be hungry, but it's not going to provide them the level of health that would come with some level of discipline and discomfort and doing the right thing consistently, which is admittedly harder to do. But also, as you probably realize, doing hard things are what actually gets you where you want to be in many cases. And fortunately, some of us have bought into that. Some of the physicians groups, some of the companies are now adopting that mantle of how do we get people to do the right things, the hard things, and how do we support them? And I think that's, in my view, the better route.
No, I totally agree, man. And at least with what we're trying to do with AllSmith and forging people, not just finding the solution, it's a very difficult business model because you're challenging people to do the hard thing with the anticipation of gaining the reward on the other side. And one of my favorite quotes, Shawn, is everything that's measured doesn't always count, and everything that counts isn't always measured. But in the world of science, in the world of data and metrics and repeatability and scalability and business and science, everybody latches on to these metrics without asking the conversation like, how do you feel? What's going on in your headspace? Like, those things should be taken into consideration. I'm not saying they're everything, but they are a variable. And it's something that I feel like gets lost a little bit in the numbers, where people are like, well, you're losing weight. if you lose weight, it's correlative to, you know, a lower BMI. A lower BMI is correlative to enhanced health biomarkers. So as a byproduct, what we're doing is working. And then all of a sudden people trust all these experts. And then, you know, these people that have degrees from Harvard that have been paid off by Big Pharma, or you see things like, you know, Bill Gates, who's the largest owner of farmland in the world and creating Beyond Burger. And it's like an uncomfortable amount of ingredients that go into that are a sustained shelf life, that have lots of things in there that have side effects. But as a byproduct of the prestige and the success that he's created in academia, it creates this manipulative buy-in to the modern day consumer, which I zoom out and literally 3 words come to mind. What the fuck?
You know, one of the things, and I liked your initial quote about measuring and what counts and what doesn't. And part of that is, you know, who decides what we measure and why do we measure those things? And a lot of the things, you know, you look at like just how healthcare is set up in many ways. We go into the doctor's office and we expect to get certain labs drawn and certain tests being done, and we use those measurements. But a lot of those measurements were developed with the intention of manipulating those numbers. And how do you manipulate those numbers? Well, it's more often than not, some sort of drug intervention, you know? And so it's like, well, I'll measure your cholesterol because I know I can give you a drug to lower it. And I will make the assumption that lower cholesterol is better. And that's been kind of the dogma that has pervaded healthcare for many years. And, you know, like as an orthopedic surgeon, I mean, there's certain metrics which we measure, like the outcome of like a knee replacement. We'll say, well, we want to look at the, you know, the angles on the x-ray. We want to look at range of motion. We want to look at subjective pain scores. And that is our marker for successful surgery. And if we look at the orthopedic literature, 98% of the people who have a knee replacement are doing wonderful. We've done a great job. But then if you start looking at some other metrics and you look at some patient-centered outcome measurements and what their expectations are, we see the numbers don't always line up. And so you talk to like a lot of physicians and you'll say, would you have this surgery as a surgeon? And surprisingly, a vast majority of surgeons themselves will say, no, I would not have that surgery, even though I do that surgery, even though I promote that surgery to my patients. And so you have to say, you know, who's doing the measuring? Why are they measuring? What are they measuring? And does it really align with what I want as a human? And you're absolutely right.
But that takes a lot of courage, because you look at the majority of these medical practitioners, and I do believe they get into the field with an honest mind and a kind heart. But then what happens is they get $500,000 in medical student loan debt, and they feel this intrinsic pressure. They're working typically 8 to 12-hour shifts where they're constantly having to see patients, document every single protocol because of the liability and legality, fear-based association with their documentation and medical malpractice issues. And then as a byproduct, these doctors are trained to prescribe pills and not really prevent disease. And I call it TEOC, time, energy, attention, and care. Those things take significantly longer than 7 minutes per patient. But if you're spending 15 to 20 minutes with a patient, you can't see as many patients within a day. Scalability is now difficult, which means now you're going to be speaking to the higher ups and the medical director of like, hey, why'd you spend so much time with that patient? What was going on there? Why'd you get behind? Now we lost this other patient. It doesn't monetize as well. And I don't know, it's challenging because that's not the expectations that are set at the onset around diet and lifestyle trying to be solutions. It's more importantly like the challenges of how Big Pharma intervenes with these things because of the fear associated with monetization, both on the debt side for the doctors, but also on how they can see and maximize their amount of patient care within each day.
Yeah, you touch on some very valid points in there. As a surgeon, I mean, I was, you know, the pressure was to see more and more patients. You know, I would see, 50 patients a day. And, you can imagine how hard it is to provide good care when you're seeing patients every 6 or 7 minutes, quite honestly. And not only that, as you're absolutely right, it's like you need to document to the maximum extent, and that takes time. So now you're spending 3 hours a day typing documents up so that you can defend yourself from any kind of legal challenge that might come up, because the lawyers will tell you, if you don't document profusely, then you set yourself up for liability. And then the billing department is saying, you need to do all this stuff so that you can bill for a maximum, so you can generate as much money for the hospital, right? And so you've got this tremendous pressure, and you're absolutely right. You go into medicine with this sort of belief that you're going to be helping all these people, and you're going to be curing diseases and doing all this stuff. And there's still some of that you think you can still achieve, but it's within this framework of, just spinning that wheel as fast as possible, documenting as much as you possibly can, coding and billing as much as you possibly can, so you can justify your salary. And yes, you're absolutely right. Many people have pressures of many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. They've deferred their income for years. I spent 4 years in college, 4 years in medical school, 5 years in a surgical training program. That's 13 years. I'm in my mid-30s before I can even start making any payment. And in my case, I took time off to play professional sports, so I was even delayed even further. So you have this really just really weird situation, and then the incentives of what you do as a physician are kind of perverse. And so if you want to talk to somebody about lifestyle and spend 20, 30 minutes talking to them about diet, exercise, and set them up, not only is that not incentivized, it's basically disincentivized. You're going to get paid less if you do that. You might even get paid at all if you do that. And so what's the incentive?
But what's so interesting in comparison to somebody in a personal trainer role or strength and conditioning role, or somebody that's in a preventative medicine position, even a physical therapist, the expectation from the consumer is that they're going to do an original consult that's going to be comped. It's not going to be monetized. They need to get into the weeds. They need to care. They should have access to them as often as possible. Because they don't have all these different letters after their name, and this psychological manipulation around more education means more care. It means more expertise, more specialization. And even to take it even further, Shawn, when you find anything by itself in the human body, it's typically attached to everything else. As an orthopedic surgeon, if you have an elbow issue, that's probably going to lead to some sort of dysfunction with the shoulder, with the scapula. It's probably going to lead to the neck. It's probably going to lead to the wrist. If you're compensating in those arenas for a long time, it's probably going to get to infect the core to extremity principle associated with the spine at some point. But we look at things in such a specialized manner without taking into consideration the broad and inclusive factors. But then those expectations are placed on physical therapists, healers, massage therapists, acupuncturists, physical trainers. It's so interesting, the high level of expectation placed on people in preventative medicine, but the low level of expectation and the fear-based monetization associated with, if you don't have health insurance, you can't actually go see this doctor. It's monumentally expensive, and you'll be penalized on your taxes without having health insurance. It has become a systemic failure of modern medicine, in my opinion.
Yes, there are some real problems with that system. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, there's obviously this hyper specialization we have within medicine, where the nephrologists aren't talking to the cardiologists, who aren't talking to the rheumatologist, and they're basically fighting with each other, and they can't see they can't see the forest for the trees in many cases. We do have. Gosh, I mean, when I look at what RFK has in front of him, I mean, there's so many things. I think the way physicians are incentivized is quite honestly perverse. I mean, that needs to be rectified. I mean, we should be, the fact that you can go to the physician and not get good health advice is an absolute tragedy. I mean, yes, I mean, there are some really good people that don't have a bunch of letters behind their names that are doing wonderful things, and they're helping a lot of people, and they get that. But the physician should be held to that standard. You should be able to go to the physician and get damn good health advice and really good support on how to be healthy, in my view. Now the problem is, it goes back to, who are we creating as physicians? We're creating people that are, and we're selecting for people that are very good at following rules and learning algorithms and memorizing things. I was very good at that. I mean, I was top of my medical school class most of the time. I was scoring the top guys on the test. I could memorize stuff. I had systems in place where I could process a lot of data and regurgitate it on a test when I needed to. Is that skill necessarily make me the best physician? No, it doesn't. Are those people necessarily the best people that you want as healers? Probably not. Now, I mean, some people are trying to recruit for some of these more sort of, intangible or emotion-based or compassion-based traits, which, maybe that's helpful, but again, there's some other things that have to be put in place. And I think, in my view, you can go to why do we go to the doctor and get a blood test? Well, it's easy to measure. Right? I can stick a needle in anybody's vein, find a vein, pull some data out there. Is that actually valuable information? I would argue, I think it's overemphasized. I know a lot of people are talking about you need blood work every 3 months and we need to measure all these things, but I don't know that that's getting us where we need to be in many cases. I mean, if we look at the population, particularly over the last 50, 60 years, almost everyone would admit that we are less healthy than we used to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did we have to measure 100 years ago? We didn't have blood tests to the extent that we have now. We can't walk into LabCorp and order $10,000 worth of tests and measure 75,000 different indices, which we can now. We didn't have all the MRIs and all the advanced imaging. And again, technology is wonderful in many ways, but is it actually doing the job of getting us healthier as a population? I don't think it has been. And so,
it's a really good point for sure. The things that come to mind for me, I want to create a little bit of transparency as far as variables that people can look at, but some things that come to mind to me are, what's my sun exposure in the morning? Am I joyful and excited to get out of bed as far as purpose, as far as problem solving and playing in the world? What is my mental clarity throughout the day? What's my physical activity on a consistent basis across 365 days in a year? To echo Mark Sisson, who I referenced before, lifting heavy 2 to 3 times a week, the incorporation of body weight gymnastics and calisthenics, sprinting every once in a while, carrying heavy things. At nighttime, is there a tribal culture? I know I've personally tried to highlight on this podcast and within my personal life, I call them sauna chats, sauna and ice connections in the evenings, fireside chats and tribal culture and chatting about things, men connecting with other men, women connecting with other women. What is my sex drive like? What's the consistency of sleep throughout a 7-day window? What does inflammation feel like? How are the joints feeling in the day-to-day? What does it feel like when I'm, lifting weights? Do I have aches and pains? What are my teeth like? Are my gums bleeding when I'm brushing my teeth? What does my skin look like? And those are just additional variables. I'm not saying they're everything, but those are things outside of the scope of peeking underneath the hood with a blood panel that are relatively free, habit-based metrics that maybe could be into consideration for people. What are your thoughts?
I'll reference my friend Rob Wolf, who I've known for many, many years, and he talks about how do you look?
We've had him on before.
Yeah, how do you look? How do you feel? How do you perform? These are things that you can kind of put in a general scope. What do I look like? What's my body composition like? What's my skin look like? What's my hair? How are my nails growing? How are my teeth feel? How do I feel? Like you mentioned, do I have energy? Do I have a purpose? Am I excited? Am I happy? And then how do I perform? Can I run fast? Can I jump high? Can I lift heavy things? Can I move efficiently? All those things are really hard to measure in a clinician's office. I mean, you can imagine I could if I went to the doctor and he said, all right, line up on the starting line and run 100 meters. I could probably sort out a lot of illness in that test very easily, but how hard could I do that realistically? I mean, I think, this is a simple waist to height measurement. How tall am I and what's my belly size? I mean, that tells me probably as much as most blood tests do when it comes to general overall health. I can get a very good screening a test with something as simple as that. And then
I also think what that also does is it unlocks great questions of, hey, okay, the waist seems to be a little bit larger in comparison to your height. What's going on with your food? What does breakfast look like? What's your morning, evening routine? What is your nutrition protocol consistently day to day? How is your sleep? How is stress regulation? Do you feel like you have a sex drive? Are you connected with the opposite sex? Or, what is your sexual orientation? What are you playing with on the day-to-day habits of hydration? What's being ingested consistently over time? And I think unlocking better questions creates an eye-opening experience for the patient as well, as to like, whoa, I actually can correct a lot of these things for free on my day-to-day habit integration and lifestyle design.
The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code AllSmith to take your coffee experience to the next level.
Yeah, we could slash healthcare costs by 80% if we were to ask the right questions. And, you know, the biggest question we get in as patients, when you come to the doctor and they said, hey, you're diabetic, or, hey, you've got, some autoimmune disease, maybe you've got rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease. And then you simply ask, why is that, doctor? Why do I have that? And almost invariably, the answer is, I don't know. And I think that's a reasonable answer. I mean, I don't know is a good answer in many cases, but the fact that we don't seek to know, and all we do is seek to treat, and I wouldn't even say treat, I would say medicate, is a real problem. And the fact that when you go to the doctor and you say, why do I have diabetes? And they say, well, I don't know, maybe it's genetics, it's just bad luck, which is more often than not the answer you get. That is a real problem. And we should be seeking to uncover what are those things, unlike what Dr. Tamika Stanford from Harvard said. I don't think obesity is just a genetic problem and there's nothing you can do about it. We have literally a physician on 60 Minutes out there saying that it doesn't matter what you do, how much you sleep, what you eat, how much you exercise. If you're obese, you're always going to be obese. That is a really, really frightening proposition, that you have people that would say that, and not only say that, but believe that. And incidentally, this person happens to be getting money from Novo Nordisk, who produces Ozempic. That may be coincidental. I'm saying that a little bit facetiously, but I mean, you should demand that your physician, I honestly talk to a lot of people that are kind of done with the healthcare system. They're like, look, I can't get the answers. I mean, I literally just interviewed a 47-year-old nurse 2 days ago who was diagnosed with this crazy, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. And the answer was infusions, immunoglobulin infusions, immune modulating drugs to the tune of over $1 million in a course of 5 years. And the result of that was minimal improvement. Mm-hmm. And she's being told, oh, get a wheelchair because you're going to end up in a wheelchair in the next few years, because she was already walking with a lot of assisted devices and was in chronic pain, maxed out on pain medicines. And, we switched her diet, put her on basically a carnivore diet, and within a couple of months, everything is gone. And it didn't cost $1 million. It cost, whatever it cost to eat.
And it's just food. Basic habit integration. And you mentioned personal experience. I mean, I played high-level Division I basketball and later played professional basketball, and I had this rash on my inner elbow. Whenever I told our trainers about it, they would send me to skin doctors and whatnot, right. And they'd give me hydrocortisone cream. They say it was some sort of eczema associated with stress or constant sweat being in the different folds of my body from 5 hours of practice and then going to class and then the weight room and all the different things. And maybe that happens to be a little bit true. But at the conclusion, when I actually had my diet and nutrition into my own hands, I just zoomed out and self-examined. I was like, okay, every day we were eating Cliff Bars, which were, the first ingredient was high fructose corn syrup. There's a ton of different ingredients and wheat-based things in there. We're over-consuming sugar because of the chronic cardio that's, emulsified into high-level sports, and 5+ hours of a cortisol elevation. You've got the pressures of so many different factors associated with school and performance and post-game interviews and all the things. When I zoomed out, the first place I went was to the paleo diet via Mark Sisson. Then from there, I later integrated into the carnivore diet after listening to the experiences that Jordan Peterson's daughter had after going fully carnivore for a little bit. I watched all my inflammatory markers go away. I battled ankle pain, plantar fasciitis, joint pain. And it was like, oh yeah, it's just overuse injuries. Well, after integrating a little bit better of a relationship between food and sleep and rest and activity, all of that pain, all of the rashes went away without any drug intervention. And then all of a sudden I go to Europe and I play basketball and my performance is significantly better because I'm not smashing 500 milligrams of ibuprofen and trying to manage inflammation with hydrocortisone cream and all kinds of caffeine just in pursuit of performance, because real food was being integrated that didn't have 75 ingredients that I couldn't pronounce on the label.
Yeah. This is a thing. I mean, you come in with a rash and it's like, we're going to put some cortisone cream on it. This is the, it's like the guy comes to you for a headache and you ask him, what does he do? And he says, well, every day I kind of hit myself in the head with a hammer. And instead of saying, hey, just stop hitting yourself in the head with a hammer, just here, take these anti-inflammatories, take this aspirin. It's like we go about things backwards in many ways. And yes, you're as you discovered yourself, this rash, yes, I mean, sweating and being stressed out and all that stuff probably contributes to it in some of the food, but this is not what the doctor's telling me. The doctor's telling me, here, just take this rash and there's nothing you can do about it, basically, other than that. This is, one of the things that I ran into as a surgeon, when I started figuring out that, yes, diet and lifestyle can impact, the orthopedic patients. In fact, I mean, the patients I had with it that needed knee replacements, when I switched their diet, they said their knee pain went away. And I was like, well, that's really interesting to me as someone who's replaced hundreds of knees and done thousands of knee scopes. And as I started to sort of push that, and start talking about it to my hospital administrative staff. And they said, no, we don't want you to really focus on that because your job is to do surgical things. This is what we pay you for. We're not paying you to talk to people about lifestyle. That's not profitable for us. And then as I realized, even though they told me this isn't something we're interested in, I still wanted to do it. But the problem I ran into is I didn't have any resources. I mean, I can say, hey, go read this book. Hey, go watch this video. And this is, remind you, this is 10, 12 years ago. Now, I mean, fortunately, I've realized that if you want to get somebody to make a change, a significant change, you got to give them resources. You got to give them the right education and you got to support them. And so for some people, it's easy. They're really internally driven. They're disciplined, but a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people need hand-holding and accountability and motivation. And this is what we created with our company, Rivera. We basically provide not only physicians that get it, that want to treat the root cause, but we also assign them an entire team that will talk to them every single day if they need to. We'll check, data from them every single day. We'll look at what they upload, what they measure. And so we can make those adjustments on the fly. And so I think healthcare has to, true healthcare, not sick care. But if we're going to actually get America healthy again, we're going to need to unaddict a lot of people from some of this food that's designed to be addictive. As you probably are aware, a lot of this food is intentionally addictive. These food chemists, and I've talked to them, literally said their job was to make food as addictive as possible, and they're very good at it. They know what chemicals excite our brain in a certain way and make us so we crave this food and can't stop eating it. This is not by accident. This is literally by design. And a lot of people have fallen prey to that. And, the fact that, obviously you're an athlete and so you've got some capacity to sort of deal with that, but that stuff, it affects everybody. And you take somebody who has just a little bit less discipline and susceptibility, and you got them hooked and you start hooking them as kids. This is the same, as you probably are aware, the cigarette companies bought the processed food companies, and the model, the Joe Camel ads that they had in the 1970s where they're trying to get 16, 15-year-old kids to start smoking. So they became customers for life. The same thing happens with the Captain Crunch cereals and the Trix and the Lucky Charms and all the, the advertising on the kids programs to get these kids eating this stuff. It starts with baby formula. If you look at the first ingredients on infant formula, breast milk substitute, it's corn syrup, it's soybean oil, it's, all these just absolutely awful ingredients that are not,
yeah, for sure.
not
It's very difficult to play that game monetarily too. I've got friends who are the founders of My really good friend, Eric Johnson, is the founder of Trident Coffee, and he's all about trying to have good ingredients and MCT oils and try to use monk fruit to sweeten rather than all these high fructose corn syrups and things. But the difficulty then becomes your challenge with shelf life.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing with some of these other products, is that they've done a great job elongating shelf life, which then also allows them to distribute and do wholesale contracts where they can distribute all over the world because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. It's very easy to transport from point A to point B. But the other thing that's coming to mind is just our education system is designed to read the thing, memorize the thing, and then show how you've comprehended the thing on an exam to show your competency based on memorization. Then that score assigns you a value of, Bryce or Shawn, this is how smart you are. Because you got an A on this, now you're graduated to the next level, and you're going to be rewarded to go to this honors program, or you can get into these schools because on paper you look like you're this extreme scholar. But you're not really critically thinking. You're memorizing to satisfy other people's expectations, to play this made-up game of life. And to echo Alex Hormozy, going back to your reference of cigarettes, this world was made up by people no smarter than you and I, who smoked cigarettes daily, that kind of tinkered in a sandbox to create rules and regulations for the world that we currently live in. And I was a freaking super rule follower until my father was diagnosed with brain cancer. And I remember being in the hospital, and he was a pain in the ass patient. They were low staffed. And then as a byproduct, they were kind of overdosing him on Dilaudid to make him a vegetable so he wasn't such a pain in the ass, so they could spend time with the other patients. And that opened my eyes tremendously of like, oh, wow, you can use these medications as tools to buy yourself time. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans. And when you're part of a system that has staffing issues, has monetary issues, that is in bed with the health insurance companies, you have the pressures overhead. If you don't take care of X, Y, and Z responsibility, you're not going to be able to put food on the table for your husband or wife and kids at home. So there's constant manipulation of this push and pull between do the right thing or do the thing that's going to get you paid. And there's a lot to unpack there. I threw a lot at you, but I definitely think that there's a few tangible things that we can pull from that story.
Yeah. So I think that let's go back to the first point about your friend with the coffee company and fighting the fact that, in order to scale this, I need to make it shelf stable. I mean, maybe we just need to say, hey, we just can't support that model anymore. And your food is going to have to be fresh and local, and it's not going to be sitting in some shelf in Thailand for 2 years. And so we might just say, hey, look, we want food, and you're going to have to go to the grocery store 2 or 3 times a week and actually go back to an older model. And yes, it's a little bit more convenient, but ultimately we're going to have a healthier populace because of that. And then to your point about now we have a hospital system that is overburdened and understaffed and overworked, and people are tired. And yes, nurses would call me in the middle of the night. Hey, Dr. Baker, can you just give me some more Ativan for this patient? Because he's being too unruly, and we want to medicate him so he just shuts up so we can deal with our other workloads, so we can do our paperwork, right? So you've got that system, but it starts with an overburdened, sick population where we have too many damn sick people, and we just don't have enough resources to deal with those people as they truly are. And so if we were to fix and instead of arguing about how do we pay for Medicare and Medicaid and all these types of things, and do we need a national health service, and should we go away from a fully private model to a fully government funded model, and who's going to pay for this? Why don't we say, let's just not have so many sick people? And I think some of these things that Kennedy is trying to address is a fair point. If we were to cut the burden of numbers of sick people in half, and I think that's very easily, we certainly could. Most of what we're seeing in the hospital are basically acute exacerbations of chronic disease. If you just scale that back by actually feeding people properly and actually, dealing with those things, then we wouldn't have some of these issues where the nurses can't take care of your dad because he's too unruly and they just want to, hit him with a bunch of, antipsychotics and opiates and, benzos and things like that. Yeah, I mean, it's a big issue, but I mean, again, failure to address the root cause, like in your situation, the overworked healthcare system is basically the eczema on your arm. And if we just keep throwing medications at it, throwing dollars at it, it doesn't fix the problem. You've got to go back to why we have so many sick people. And it has to do with, how do we feed them? Some of the other variables we can talk, sleep and exercise and activity and light exposure and all these other things that go into that we've kind of put ourselves into this sort of really crazy, stressed out, kind of in a way, societal prison that we all find ourselves in.
Yeah, well said. What are your thoughts on the eye test? We look back at the previous director of healthcare within the United States, and it's an overweight woman who clearly doesn't practice what she sort of preaches. She's preaching from an old school pyramid of health that, pushes whole grains and all these things that are from modern day education. I wouldn't even necessarily fault her. She's just paying forward the things that she learned in her schooling, which are pseudo manipulated to then push the pursuit of buying these artificial things like these cereals that say, they'll lower your cholesterol, or, whole grains in the morning are the best things for you, not to mention just the lecithins and the anti-nutrients that cause inflammation within the large intestine. But when you look at, I'll just use yourself and RFK Jr., you're big, strong, masculine men that are admittedly say, hey, we don't have it figured out, but we're in pursuit of trying to be better. And we're in pursuit of trying to eat things that are limited ingredient, that are as close to our primal ancestors as possible, and don't have artificial things in it, because we want to be harder to kill. We want to be protectors, providers, and we are in pursuit of truth. To me, that sounds like a no-brainer of trust and buy-in, because you're in pursuit. You're falling in love with the journey of trying to find the answer, as opposed to the high horse certainty of like, this is the answer. This is what the education and the research says, which for whatever reason, in the past at least, has created tremendous buy-in from people like her and like Bill Gates, who to me are relatively frail, easy to kill, high inflammatory markers, and don't seemingly pass my eye test or my smell test.
It's easy to manipulate data, and it's easy to manipulate statistics. What's hard to manipulate is your belly fat. I'm not saying trying to be flippant about this, but, when you have people that, we can use the analogy. You wouldn't go to a dentist with rotten teeth. You wouldn't go to a hair barber that has awful hair. I don't think you should be getting health advice from people that cannot demonstrate health themselves. If they can't master health in their own life, then it's hard to, just as more, I think it's important to see what they produce. You wouldn't go to a coach who has a bunch of awful athletes. You want a coach that produces good athletes. And so what are they doing consistently? And they're consistent patterns. If you were to fill the regulatory health care, bodies with people that exude good health, I think in general, you would have better outcomes. Now, it's not to say that there aren't people that have things that are beyond their control and don't have good knowledge. There's always the fat coach that wins a Super Bowl. You look at Andy Reid from the Chiefs. He's by no means a healthy looking dude, but he's won a lot of Super Bowls. Obviously he just lost the last one, but I think that for sure, just from a trust standpoint, when you see some mentally deficient guy dressed up as a girl that's overweight is now the assistant secretary for HHS or something like that, whatever the position that person has, where you see these health department heads that are obviously morbidly obese, obviously sick. I don't think people even just trust them in general. And then, of course, you can, as I mentioned, you can literally find studies to support literally any position you want. I can find studies that would present a vegan diet being the healthiest diet. I can find studies that show that a carnivore diet is the healthiest diet. Where the actual truth is, I think actually ends up in people that spend the time and energy and demonstrate that throughout their lives. And these are the people that I tend to look up to and listen to. I think I don't tend to take criticism or advice from people that are, haven't achieved what I've achieved. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to do that. And so to take advice from a physician who is clearly obese, out of shape, and just reading a bunch of studies on what they learned in medical school. And this is a quote you often hear from physicians. They say, well, half of what you learn in medical school is wrong, and we just don't know which half that is. how accurate that quote is, it doesn't really matter. Yes, there's a lot of bad information out there that will change with time, and people are often stuck in this dogmatic stuff. We see this around things like cholesterol. I mean, I've been fighting this battle for many, many years, and it's still, these people are so adamantly, myopically focused on this one stupid variable that, has some relevance in certain situations, but it could be that there's a lot of different things that change that. And this is something that I think RFK said this in his speech, that if you feel that you can't question the science, you're not scientific. I mean, that's a very unscientific statement to see that you can't question the science. When Anthony Fauci came up there and said, if you question me, you're questioning the science, which is taking on this religious sort of role, that it's almost a religious, and it's because you no longer are a scientist when you say that. When science can't be questioned, it's no longer science.
Totally. That's very well said, man. I'm glad you brought up Anthony Fauci, because that was a difficult time, especially as somebody that works in the fitness space, of, having hours cut to 50%, striving to provide value remotely, creating buy-in for people in a health and wellness space. At the time, I was working for a CrossFit gym called Invictus, and another space called Vuori, which is a local brand, and trying to lead mindset and wellness workouts via different remote capacities. And I don't know, it really piqued my eyebrows a little bit, just the disconnect. Something about it just felt really off. And I held my ground and just chose not to get vaccinated, not because I'm an anti-vaxxer, or I hate people, or I'm selfish. It was simply like, wow, like this was pushed out really fast. And I love what's called the power of the pause, which is, okay, like there's a lot of political volatility. There's a lot of opinions going on here. Let me just kind of pause. Let me observe. Let me see what's going on. And when I saw the myocarditis floating to the surface, when I saw some of the side effects that were then coming to the surface, it didn't really make sense to me to mask up all the time. Different cease and desists that were being regulated based on people exercising in parks, despite the fact that they're maintaining the 6-foot distance, which was the technicality associated with the rules and regulations at that time. Bars and marijuana places all being opened, but gyms being closed, things that are seemingly good for your health, beaches being closed, no access to natural sunlight. I don't know, Shawn, like some of this stuff really just, like, for me at that time, I was like, you know what? I don't care what happens to me. All I know is something feels off here. And now, as we fast forward, we're seeing all this data and things that were pseudo conspiracies at the time float to the surface and seemingly be all true. And then, just to take it even a step further, innocent people don't get pardoned, man. Not like that. And so I'm curious your thoughts on Dr. Andy Fauci, and just kind of what came to mind for you when you saw that midnight pardoning take place before the presidential office switched from Biden to then Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the whole experience through COVID, as a physician, I mean, when they first started coming out and saying these vaccines are 98% efficacious, that was a big red flag, because there's none. This doesn't exist in medicine. So I was like, this can't be true. I mean, the fact that they told people to put on bandanas to cover their face, and I'm a surgeon who wears a mask every day. I'm like, I know what a mask is for. It's not for that. That doesn't work. I mean, that was my, because people say, would you go have surgery on a surgeon that doesn't, would you have a surgery with a surgeon not wearing a mask? And I'm like, yeah, because it doesn't really make that much difference anyway. I mean, that's not why we wear masks in the OR in the first place. It's not really to protect people from viral infection, just basically to prevent blood and crap from flying into our face and mouth for the most part. I mean, that's the main reason we end up wearing these things. The whole lack of informed consent. And I had social media. I got banned from Twitter. I got my YouTube channel shut down 5 different occasions just because I said we need better informed consent around this stuff. I, like you, did not choose to get vaccinated simply because I felt I wasn't at risk. I felt I'm a generally healthy guy. it was incredibly frustrating to see that, yes, they would open strip bars and alcohol, places, because they didn't want people to go in and have DTs because alcohol is necessary. But at the same time, they would shut down gyms. It made zero sense to me, the way they ruled that out. The fact that, whether Fauci or some of the other prominent players in the COVID sort of pandemic area, Rachel Walensky, Alfred Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, Scott Gottlieb, the FDA guy that was now also at Pfizer, or was at Pfizer. Those folks, they are probably in many ways culpable for whatever deception had occurred. And I think it's pretty clear that there was a lot of people engaging in deception, where the virus might have originated, whether it came from a lab in China versus a wet market. All of that, I think there's going to be a lot of books written. There'll be a lot of people screeching and yelling about it on social media. You might have some Senate hearings where senators, wag their finger at people. Is anybody actually going to have any significant consequence to this? I don't know. I mean, are we going to see Fauci, wearing an orange jumpsuit in a jail somewhere? I kind of doubt that's going to happen. Should it happen? Will it there probably will be a few token people that take the fall and end up in jail for what has happened. I do think
you're totally correct. And the other thing that comes to mind is exactly that. Like, none of this was passing the smell test if you were just somebody that paid attention to pattern recognition. What vaccine in history has so many different boosters? The viral infections, I had friends that were experiencing different bouts of erectile dysfunction that had all kinds of weird inflammatory or viral issues going on as a byproduct of this. Just the scrutiny of Rogan and everybody around ivermectin, and that being something that was relatively helpful. I mean, at the end of the day, if something is pretty helpful to prevent people from being extremely sick, I mean, that definitely is something to pay attention to for sure. I also heard JD Vance talk about, the most sick he's ever been in his entire life was when he took the vaccine. And so none of these things have to be an all or nothing. They just have to be like, oh, wow, okay, cool. That's an interesting data point. I now should get to exercise my free will to choose if I'm going to get this or not get it. And I shouldn't be scrutinized either way, especially if I'm somebody that consistently takes care of myself, practices the art of preventative medicine, eats well, sleeps well, does the things that takes really hard and consistent work, doesn't just go take a pill or jab himself and all of a sudden claim to be higher than thou, better than everybody else, and anti-selfish because of taking care of themselves. To me, that's the most selfless thing you can do, is fill your cup so that way you can be of service to other people. To me, if we're going to bring in, a God-like overarch, it's like, if you're going to live like Jesus, you're going to take care of yourself to then diffuse that energy and that service into the world of love, connection, and collaboration. To me, this was just anti-human. It was very much just like grabbing the bull by the horn and saying, we want to exercise control. If you don't do this, we're going to insert FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and there will be consequences.
There's three points I'd like to touch on. One is, when we talk about like, how do we monitor new drugs? And when I was in my training, a good surgeon told me, don't be the first guy to adopt something, but don't be the last guy. Meaning that a lot of the stuff that comes out new ends up not working well, and it can be harmful. And then you don't want to wait forever to adopt it if it actually turns out to be the case. But we have advice. This, most people went through COVID are aware of this so-called VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, that's out there, which is well underutilized. But we have a drug reporting system called MedWatch. For every new drug that the FDA clears, there is supposed to be post-market surveillance. And this is the same thing for like Ozempic. I talked to a lot of emergency room physicians that are seeing all kinds of people with gastrointestinal issues, intractable nausea, vomiting, gastroparesis, bowel obstructions from these drugs. The MedWatch system is supposed to capture that data, but the reality is it's estimated that less than 1% of significant adverse events are actually reported to VAERS, or not to VAERS, to MedWatch. So we don't even know. We have all these drugs on the market that may be harming people, killing people, causing severe lifelong issues, and they don't know it for maybe 10, 15 years because the system is so underutilized. And so my suggestion, and I've put this on social media, RFK, is that should be mandatory for the first couple of years of drugs on the market. That if somebody comes to the ER and they're on Ozempic and they end up with gastroparesis, or they commit suicide or whatever, that should be cataloged and recorded. It wouldn't be that hard to do because everybody comes in, gets them, they ask them all their meds are on, and they have a chief complaint. And it's not hard to tie those together and just upload that data. So that should be mandatory in my view.
I mean, I almost want it to be like before they can get a refill of that particular prescription, they have to share their experience based on some sort of questionnaire to enhance the data collection.
Well, I mean, you could. I mean, that's going to depend on the consumer being willing to do that. And a lot of people won't be willing to. But I mean, you certainly could have if somebody ends up with an ER, you need to know what meds are on and see if there's if we see a signal that, rates of ER visits triple when people are on this drug for whatever condition, that should be known. And currently it's not known. The other thing is, you mentioned 6 feet. How many people in the United States, and I'll be willing to say in the entire world, did not hear that you're supposed to stand 6 feet apart? Now that number was totally made up and totally arbitrary, as we later found out. I mean, it's kind of stupid, but everybody knew that, right? You could not watch a TV show, a radio ad. You could not see anything on social media. You could not walk in any store without seeing signs everywhere. Please stand 6 feet apart, right? So we had this massive propaganda information campaign to tell us what we need to know. Why can't we do the same for garbage food? I mean, we could have, at the same time, it would have been, hey, now would be a good time during this pandemic to not eat a bunch of junk food every day. Now would be a good time to lose those extra 20, 30 pounds, because we know unequivocally you are at higher risk for not only getting sick and dying, but also spreading disease more. We know that obese people spread virus more readily than non-obese people do. I mean, that's clearly known. That was never mentioned. I mean, there's clear studies that show that. You look at data on things like influenza, people that are obese are 5 times more likely to spread the disease to someone else. And so we didn't talk about that at all. Why didn't we talk about that? Because no one's making money off that. Because
I'll throw in, if you haven't seen it, you got to turn on Shane Gillis on Netflix. He has a super funny comedic bit about the word comorbidities. He's like, what does that even mean? It means obese people and people that don't take care of themselves. So we use the word comorbidities because it's around the time where everybody was offended by the word fat and everybody had to be all inclusive. But I love the word because it's so brutally honest that it creates transparency. And if you want things to be digestible to the modern day consumer, you have to just use terminology that is well understood. The word comorbidities, nobody knows what that means unless they reach into ChatGPT or some sort of Urban Dictionary.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes our fear of offense is really harming us. It's really harmful. I mean, this whole movement of, body positively, inclusivity. I mean, it's great. I mean, we'll all admit that, everybody should have, equal opportunity and access. But I mean, at some point you have to realize there are some realities to some of these things, and we can't just ignore those obvious realities. I mean, you got somebody that says, I believe that I am a female and I've got a prostate. Well, what happens when you don't get your prostate examined, or you don't get your PSA checked, or you end up with prostate cancer and no one's looking for it because they're looking for a uterus? I mean, you can see where this, this sort of charade stuff can go awry very quickly. And the same thing with obese people saying, I refuse to be weighed. Well, I mean, some of these drugs are dosed upon your body weight. We need to know this information. Some of your conditions are contingent upon some of these things. Some of these treatment options are dependent upon what the reality is. And so that type of thing is really important, and so we talked about the MedWatch. We talked about the lack of informed consent. I think the other thing there was one other thing I wanted to mention during the, the pandemic stuff. And like I said, we spent, we in 1954, 45% of the U.S. population was smoking, right? It's now around 13%. So we, as a nation, decided that, we don't think people should be smoking. We think it's bad for us. I believe the same thing could be done with the food supply, how we get there. Again, do we ban foods? Do we tax foods? Do we put warning labels on foods? I'm not sure what the solution is going to be for that, but it is solvable. It is a solvable problem. For sure. It's just a matter of willpower. If you live in Japan, for instance, Japan has one of the lowest obesity rates in the world. I think Vietnam actually has the lowest rate at about 3%. But in Japan, if you are morbidly obese, you just ain't got no clothes. They don't literally have clothes for you, And this is the thing in the United States. We have accommodated so much that we have created. I used to have patients that come to me because they had knee pain and they were obese. And they said, Doc, would you please write me one of those mobility scooters so I could get a prescription so I could just, drive around? And I always said no. And it wasn't because I was an asshole. It was because I know if I stick you in that mobility scooter, that extra 100 pounds you have is going to turn into 150 pounds and you're going to get more and more issues. And so the problem is in the United States, we have accommodated to the point where we've created, if you go to these other countries where you don't accommodate for massive obesity, you just don't have as many obese people because they just are forced to do what it takes to no longer be obese. And I think that's a real problem.
It creates an incentive system. If you want to change behavior, you have to change the incentive. And if there's no incentive to then lose weight and you're always accommodated by your poor choices, as a byproduct, you're just going to kind of keep pursuing comfort over the course of time, especially when there's psychological disruption or some sort of traumas, and that's not displaying a lack of compassion and empathy. In my opinion, that's actually the highest form of love because it's trying to steer people towards better choices, trying to enhance the quality of their life and put them around like-minded individuals that are going to tell them the honest truth and not just handhold them into dysfunction, dysregulation, and poor choices.
Yeah, I saw someone talking about the fact that humans innately are problem solvers. And if we have no problems, we create them. If our life is too comfortable, then we start making up things to have problems about. And I think that's, that's something when I've got 4 children and you want them to, you want to give them what you can and you want them to, you don't want them to be harmed in any way, but at the same time, you have to give them challenges to overcome. And if you do everything for them, they become useless in a way. And so I think that's the same thing where you tell people, hey, look, I'm not going to accommodate you in every single aspect of your life. You're going to have to figure some of this stuff out yourself. And then hopefully some of that solution will result in a better, stronger, healthier version of yourself. Not everybody's going to go there. Some people are going to wallow in self-pity and complain and maybe adapt in a way we wouldn't expect. Maybe they'll make their own mobility scooter. They'll figure out a way to put it together. Some people are pretty industrious.
Yeah. Maybe it'll create some sort of innovation to problem solve, like you said, which is at the root of entrepreneurship and invention, which is very cool. I want to jump in. You mentioned Elon a couple times, and he obviously did a great job with X. He's doing some cool things with Doge, not to mention seeing the billions of dollars that was spent in Social Security to people over the age of 100, from like age 100 to 369. It's like, whoa, that's a little eye-opening. We probably should have had some checks and balances in that arena at some point. But moving the needle a little bit forward in relation to you specifically and your ability to have freedom of speech, your ability to share things that are sometimes funny, sometimes serious, sometimes just kind of recollecting based on an experience or a conversation. Now you have freedom to do so. You're not going to get a cease and desist from YouTube or have your YouTube channel banned or your X account banned, which I think is beautiful because it gives you the opportunity to freely put information out there and then people can take what they need and they can leave the rest. What are your thoughts on the future of freedom of speech and then kind of the popularity around Zuckerberg and some of these other people associated with social media kind of taking down their stance that for the last 4 years has been a little bit rigid around, kind of silencing everybody based on a discrepancy of opinion in relation to healthcare?
Yeah, I think in some ways, the good guys won. I mean, I think that, and I think Elon Musk rightly points it out, freedom of speech isn't to protect the non-controversial stuff. It is there to protect the stuff that pisses people off, because that's what freedom of speech is really about. You can say, I've seen people say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. If someone has dangerous thoughts and ideas, then it's important for them to be able to speak so people can see that, see what they're talking about, and learn who these folks are, what they truly believe, and then they can judge that in its entirety. When you end up with concealment and people clandestinely sharing these ideas, that's when I think problems start, because then these things go sort of uninvestigated, unknown, and then you have people that do really maybe awful things in relationship to that. So I am, obviously, as someone who was banned from Twitter for life for, I don't even know why, who had my YouTube channel shut down on 5 separate occasions, who's been shadow banned consistently on all the other social media over time, just for saying things that I don't think, again, obviously I have my own opinions. I don't think what I'm saying is hateful or harmful in any way. I mean, when you have, I don't even know, some liberal arts major censoring physicians talking about medical studies, that to me is a real problem. And then you get into this, the whole Orwellian thought police type of situation where, people are being arrested in the UK for praying silently because they disagree with, abortion clinics. I mean, who cares? I mean, let these people think and do what they want to do. And, as long as they're not, like I said, violently, enforcing things. When I was a kid, I just saw this thing, I think in Germany, they were talking about that if you say something offensive online, we can arrest you, and you can be charged with a crime. And it's worse online because it stays there. And if you say something to someone's face, it's very ephemeral. It goes away. No one else might hear it, or a few people hear it, and that's the end of it. But when I grew up as a kid, we had this little song when someone would say something. We would say, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me." You remember these, you kind of annoyingly say that as a kid because it's true. I mean, yeah, you get people that say bad things about you all the time. I cannot tell you how many people have criticized me, told me all kinds of negative things. I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm fine. Bring it on.
The other one that I really love is I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off of me and sticks to you.
Yeah, I mean, we need to go back to that. I mean, it's like little kid stuff that can figure this stuff out. Now we got grown adults that are panicking and need their safe spaces and cowering and crying, setting up the lighting, so the lighting on their social media, so when they can capture the tears when they cry, when they put their performance on. I mean, it's just amazing.
Totally. Rogan said it really, really well a few years ago. He goes, words are like noises coming from a mouth. Like, you don't go to the zoo and get upset at an animal for making noise if they're hungry, or if they're slightly uncomfortable, or they're just feeling threatened or fear or happy. Like, I just think it's an interesting dichotomy how we allow words to infiltrate. Words can be important. They can be really valuable, but they should also be relatively filtered by the individual, not necessarily by the big agencies that are seeking control and profit. And that leads me to my next question. We've talked about RFK a little bit. Do you think he's been kind of deliberately silenced by corporate media, government agencies, and some of the social media giants because he exposes too much about things like Big Pharma, environmental toxins, and the corrupt regulatory bodies?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether he's right on all of it is debatable, but certainly, I mean, asking those questions, you'll either be completely banned or you'll be ridiculed. And he has certainly been ridiculed to no extent. I mean, he's been painted with a certain brush, and you see this, if you just take a cursory look and you clip something out, and you can make anyone look like a villain or a hero depending upon how they're edited. And so we see that, and it happens on both sides of the political spectrum and both sides of the nutrition wars and any topic you want to talk about. And so that's clearly been happening. I think that his approach is much more moderate than many people would be led to believe based on, 5-second, 10-second social media clips or news clips. I mean, he does threaten some very well monetized interests. I mean, there are, like I said, just the act of getting healthy, just the act of not eating garbage threatens, literally trillions of dollars worth of agricultural, petrochemical, pharmaceutical interests. And so any of this stuff, and he has had a very prominent and loud voice in this thing. So he has got, during COVID, he was one of the 12 disinformation dozen, which were highlighted, him and some of the other folks that were out there that Facebook identified as, these are the people that are spreading all this quote unquote misinformation. And we had the fact checkers and the misinformation police going after that. And so, and to the credit of those companies, they have, for a large percentage of the people, I don't know what the number is in the US, probably 40 to 50% of the people think RFK is a psychopath. They think he's some anti-vax nutball, that takes some doing to do. That takes some effort and some, and some money to do it for most things. Now, if you are clearly, a crazy wacko person, you don't need a lot of money to do that. That's self-evidence. But I mean, if you listen to the guy talk for more than 10 seconds, you see that he has a lot of things that make sense. And then it takes a lot of money to really villainize that, like people do.
You also can't fake 20 plus strict pull-ups, man.
Well, I mean, there's walking the walk.
It's like,
yeah, right. I mean, it's, when and that's one of the reasons why I'm so invested in being able to walk the walk, because I have a health message. And I think if I was some, kind of frail or obese guy trying to say the same message, I would be dismissed outright. And I should be, and it's just like, because I can kind of put up and walk the walk, there's more people. And the fact I've got an MD behind my name gives me some level of credibility, which, the MD may or may not be. I mean, in many ways, in my view, having an MD is also often a detriment to figuring out how to get healthy, because you've been sort of brainwashed the other way.
I mean, exactly. It's almost on both sides of the coin. Previously, it created a lot of reputability. Now it's showing that, like, oh, wow, your headspace has been infiltrated of all these things, which is how I feel in getting education, exercise physiology, and energy systems. Like, I've actually spent a lot of the last 8 to 10 years unlearning a lot of the things that I thought I knew, and trial and erroring things in different capacities based on childlike and dog-like exploration and curiosity, where I've found the ability to meet more people where they're at rather than being married to a protocol based on research and science.
Well, the nice thing about the space that I occupy, this is the health space, is that it is more challenging to gaslight people with results. Like I can tell you, hey, go eat a bunch of meat and stop eating processed food, and I think you'll get healthier. And people either do it or they won't. But what will happen is many people they'll drop 50 pounds of fat. Their autoimmune disease will go away. They'll no longer be on medications. They'll wake up happier, healthier. That's hard to deny for a person. But if I were to have a argument about, say, some political thing, or climate change or whatever, you can fill in the controversial topic. It's really hard for me to verify. I cannot individually verify whether the climate is changing or whether the ocean levels are right. I have no way of doing that realistically, but I can look in the mirror and I know how I feel. So it's hard to refute those types of things. So I think we're having people, and this is where I think a lot of things are taking root. And this is where I think the whole ball of yarn is becoming unraveled. Up to this point, I think the media, the companies had a pretty good tight lock on people. There was a few kind of wacko hippies that, they just kind of ignored. But once they dropped the COVID bomb on everybody and they saw how much, like you said, stuff just didn't pass the smell test and how ridiculous it got, a lot of people opened their eyes and said, wait a minute, this is all BS. And I think this whole backlash and some of the reasons why Trump is even sitting in office, particularly as RFK got attached to him, is people are like, we don't believe the doctors anymore. We don't believe the experts anymore. We don't necessarily believe what the banks are telling us, what the big academic centers are telling us. And so it's all unraveling. And now you have people that are questioning everything. And I think it's great. I think it's good. Mm-hmm. I mean, hopefully we'll get to some level of what is more close to the truth. I think truth is always going to be a journey, finding the ultimate truth. But I mean, at least we get in the direction that, hey, look, you can't distrust the so-called experts anymore, because they've been proven to be, in many cases, outright lying. Some of them just got it wrong, but some of them are just out there intentionally being deceptive. And I think the point I was going to make earlier was that, over the years, we've had a lot of like pharmaceutical companies that have been fined massively, millions, and in fact, billions of dollars, like when Vioxx was on the market in the early 2000s, and it got pulled because all these people dropped dead of cardiovascular disease. And they knew it going in. I mean, they literally knew that they were killing people, and it was like an unfortunate side effect because it was otherwise a pretty good drug. And I used it in my patients because it worked pretty well for, knee pain and stuff like that. It was something I prescribed. I had no idea that it was out there. But then they pulled it off the market, and they fined, I think it was, I can't remember who produced Vioxx. It might have been Merck, but they ended up paying $2 billion fine or something like this, pulled off the market. Not a single person lost their job. No one went to jail. The money they paid was chump change. I mean, $2 billion is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but when your operating budget is, 200 billion, it's like the coffee pot money, something like that.
1% fine for 99% profit.
Yeah, something along those lines. And so this is a thing that will we see something similar happen in COVID? One person goes to jail, Pfizer and, J&J pay $4 billion in fines, and they've made hundreds of billions of dollars in profit. I mean, what is the actual real damage here that would actually change things significantly? Now, again, if RFK gets the corporate capture out of the FDA, I mean, when you have 66% of your money coming from drug companies to regulate you for new drug approvals, that is a real problem. And we can see it at the FDA, the USDA, Department of Education, all these things that are just corporate captured. So we have to fix that.
Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyan Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyan is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag or even an overnighter. Kinyan's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to kinyan.io and use code AllSmith at checkout to begin your pain-free journey. No, very well said, man. I appreciate you getting into the depth a little bit more. And also, I want to reference Brigham Bueller, the founder of Ways to Well, and also Dr. Jason Fan, the founder of Live Natural here in San Diego, who are kind of popularizing peptides. And, you mentioned briefly Ozempic and semaglutide. Those things were FDA approved, but come with this huge onslaught of side effects. But then you're looking at some of the things that are stimulating the pituitary gland to produce more natural human growth hormone, like tesamorelin, like CJC-1295, paired with ipamorelin. We've heard a lot of the positive benefits of things like BPC-157 from Dr. Andrew Huberman. And I think some of those things are going to start floating to the surface and becoming a little bit more cost-effective and readily available now that RFK is kind of in the mix. He's somebody that does, want to at least highlight these natural resources that are not synthetic compounds, but are things that can be incredibly beneficial and hopefully not reliant. Maybe they're things that do stimulate positive health and wellness habits over the course of time, but create a little bit of a starting momentum. What are your thoughts on some of the education around peptides and the discrepancy between what RFK is kind of pushing versus FDA approval and regulation?
Well, I mean, I think to be fair, I mean, if you have a rigorous drug approval process, not to say we don't still need some drugs, right? We're going to probably need some. I mean, you can argue that how many more do we need? How much more technology we have? How can we manipulate the human physiology in a beneficial way? It needs to undergo the same level of high rigor. If you're going to say, hey, we're going to use BP157 as a peptide treatment for something, it needs to go through the correct randomized control trial. So it isn't just get scammy, because I see, just as much as the pharmaceutical industry has a lot of people that are doing deceptive things, we see that in the supplement industry as well. I mean, a lot of the supplement companies are bought and owned by these pharmaceutical companies. So we have to have, if humans are going to pay money for it and consume it, it needs to be well tested and well documented that it actually works and what the side effects are. I mean, in my view, I think, all these things are add-ons. If you don't have decent nutrition, decent sleep, decent activity, sunlight, I mean, there's some basic pillars, and you got to get those things right first. And I don't care how much, BP 157 or how much you stand in front of a red light or how much you ground or stand in cold plunges. If you're not sleeping and eating well and being active and not being sedentary, that stuff is going to have minimal impact. And so I think we got to get the focus on, let's do the basic things consistently across the board for as many people as possible. And then you can start talking about these other things and how efficacious they may or may not be.
I 100% agree with that. And that just echoes, the famous Louis Simmons from West Side Barbell. You don't want to step over hundreds to pick up dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why they're called
majoring
supplements.
in the minors. And the basics are the basics for a reason. And I just think, we've gotten this mindset of convenience and I want it now type of thing. I mean, and it's like, in the modern world, you don't even really have to have much more than 2 brain cells to actually survive. I mean, back in the day, and it's kind of interesting, we go back in the evolutionary model, our human's brain has shrunk by about 200 cc's from what it was 100,000 years ago. And part of that might be due to nutrition, but you think about the tasks that we have to do to survive today. Yes, there's emails and all the distractions, but the basics of survival are, if I take my phone and swipe, I can have food delivered to my house. That's all I need to do. We've made it so easy to survive. Whereas before, you had to figure out, can I walk this way without some lion jumping on me? How do I get my next meal? I had to have heightened senses and more appreciation and understanding of the world around me. And right now we've changed the world around us. So it's so simplified that you don't even need any level of intelligence or innate abilities to survive. Now, again, survival is different than thriving, but many of the population is just doing the bare minimum to survive. Particularly if we get to the point where, as Elon Musk suggests, that we will all have robots taking care of us, we'll all have some universal basic income because robots will be doing all the work, and we have nothing to do but sit around and eat and play video games. This is where some of us are going. Now, I've seen some level of evidence that the latest generation, Generation Z, I'm in part of Generation X, so I'm on my way out eventually, but they're seeming to adopt a more maybe health conscious life, which would be great. If the robots free us up to explore the world and create and be entrepreneurs and be physically robust, then that's great. I think that's great. I worry that it's going to have the opposite effect for certainly some percentage of the population. Now, if we all turn into Wall-E World, I don't know if you've seen that the Disney film or the Pixar film Wall-E, where all the fat people are in their hovercrafts sucking down their soy drinks while the robots do everything for them. If that's the future for me, I'm not excited about it.
Yeah, totally. I want to jump into your humor, man. For people that are watching on video, I love some of the posts that you put up. One of them being this, which I think you can see a little bit, which is kind of funny, which is a picture of Bill Gates and says, every time someone eats a steak, this man cries. Yeah. And sometimes your sense of humor, I love it because it's satirical, it's playful, but it also it makes you think a little bit, and it probably ruffles some people's feathers. Where does that level kind of track with what you're trying to put out into the world?
Well, I mean, as you probably are aware, social media, which for good or bad, I mean, there's a lot of bad things about social media, but it can be a positive, it can be a source of positive change. And I think that you have to provide some level of engagement and entertainment to get people to stick around enough to hear your overarching message. And my message obviously is a very serious and important message, but I found that, you have to, you know, engage in some humor and some playfulness, and you have to be willing to offend some people occasionally. And some people do get offended. I'm not going to follow you anymore. Well, okay. I probably don't need a bunch of followers that are so weak-minded that they can't appreciate a little bit of humor, or so thin-skinned that they can't tolerate just, a little bit of, playfulness. I don't think I'm intentionally hurtful or
No.
that type of stuff, but there tends to be some subtlety there. But I mean, and as you mentioned with Shane Gillis talking about, humor can be very powerful.
Oh, yeah.
You can point out absurdities by humor. And sometimes you see that, it's just like some of these things are just so absurd. It's almost, if it wasn't real, it would be funny. And then you try to make it funny anyway. And then people get it. It's
For
like,
sure.
this is how ridiculous
He
it is.
even takes it a step further, Shane Gillis. He goes, what are the symptoms of COVID? Oh, hold on. Asking if there are symptoms is a symptom. Everything was a symptom of COVID.
Yeah.
And he goes into it, and I crack up because everything was everything at that time.
Yeah, it's asymptomatic spread. We can have asymptomatic. You mean I can be not sick and spread it? Yes. It's
totally.
It was just hilarious.
And it was the way he communicated it was comedic, and people should definitely check it out. Shout out to Shane Gillis. I've watched that a couple of times. I'd love to have him on the show. We've had a couple other comedians on before, but as we wrap things up, I want to touch briefly on the political assassination of truth and the Kennedy family's history with assassination. I mean, it piques my eyebrows a little bit on, is he at risk for being too disruptive to the establishment? I mean, after seeing the assassination attempts on Trump, what RFK Jr. is doing is really going against the grain. This is some things that have been a part of the establishment for a very long time. He's really ruffling some feathers in some ways that, we've seen the Epstein stuff. We've seen the P. Diddy stuff. We've seen what happens with some of the political powers behind the curtain. How do you think that's going to kind of play out for RFK Jr. and his political pursuits?
Well, I mean, I certainly think it's a risk. I mean, obviously you saw somebody, zip the bullet right by Trump's head, almost got him. And I mean, if you think about it, like presidents, if you look at the stats through all the presidents in the war that have been, the 47 presidents we've had, I think 20% of them had assassination attempts. And I can't remember how many have been, 5 or 6 have been successful. So it's a pretty damn dangerous job. You've got a 1 in 5 chance of somebody trying to shoot you in the head. That's a pretty risky job in general. And despite the fact that he has, millions of dollars of security details around him, I assume at all times, and then that trickles down. But yeah, I mean, there are clearly people that have been assassinated for, threatening corporate interests. I mean, you hear about this all the time, and I have no doubt that people have been either overtly killed or accidentally killed or suicided, as people like to say. I think that's a real possibility. Now, obviously, it's harder when you become a very, very public figure and it's being expected. And I think, it's one of those things that, people probably know this, but I mean, there's ways to kill people that is very, very clandestine. You walk by and you drop something in a drink, or you brush something on their skin and it looks like a heart attack. And I mean, and who has stuff to gain from that? I mean, it's not surprising that people will do some very horrendous things for a little bit of money. I mean, there's people that'll rob you and kill you for $50. I mean, so you think, what would somebody do for $10 million or whatever, that if they think they can get away with that. So yes, I do think those are possibilities. I think that it would not surprise me if it would happen. Obviously, we hope and pray it doesn't happen, because I think he's on the side of good and trying to do the right things. And he's actually, when he was asked about this, he said, I'm willing to take that risk because it's so important. I'd rather be dead than not make these changes that I think need to be changed. And I certainly respect that. But yeah, I do think that, I mean, I think they'll try other things first. tie him up in the courts, smear his name, try to show where he's doing things wrong, try to change public sentiment against him and say, oh, he's gone too far. Look what he's done. He's taken away medication from these poor little cancer kids. And look, he's killing all these kids with his anti-vaccine rhetoric and trying to sway them that way. And then if that doesn't work, and who's behind that? Is it really the people that's generating that, or is there a corporation that's stirring those interests up? I mean, we're finding out.
One of the worst arguments that I've ever seen is when somebody's trying to do something gently disruptive or in the pursuit of change, when people start to personally attack them, and look at historical reference that's completely unrelated to the subject matter at hand, I'm like, okay, you just lost the argument because it's completely out of context.
Yeah, when you start, when you start with personal attacks, yes, I mean, but they're effective in many ways. They're effective for some people. Some people, you say, hey, RFK cut off some bear, stuck some, what was it, a bear head in Central Park, or I don't know what the hell. I don't really pay attention much to that stuff. Or he had an affair on his wife or something like that. It's just like, okay, what does that have to do with what he's trying to do, though? It doesn't have, yes, maybe it speaks to character to some degree, but you can look at someone's over a lifetime. I guarantee if we were to have a video recording of every person's thoughts their whole life, I wouldn't want to be subjected to that. And it was displayed for the world to know. Yeah, there's probably,
I'd be in big trouble.
Yeah, we'd all be in big trouble because we've all had these thoughts or actually done things that we would regret it later in life. Stupid stuff you did when you're in your 20s or as a teenage kid.
I think what's beautiful about that, though, Shawn, is that it's not reading off a teleprompter. It creates relatability and connection to the human, and shows that, over the course of time, they are evolving, they're digesting, they're processing, they're upgrading or in some cases downgrading the operating system based on the human experience. And I actually really like that as far as just my observation from a consumer. I like when people say things are like, hey, I upgraded and I learned this, and this, contrary to what I believed before. Here's where I'm at now. And I think that's awesome, rather than being married to something like, oh, according to this, and this is how it is. To me, that just screams BS. And I do think it's fun, the complexities of the ping pong and back and forth of podcasts. I love that Trump and JD Vance and some of these people have the bravery to go on and chop it up with some of these podcasters and have honest conversation in the pursuit of truth and trying to paint the picture for the American people to have a better understanding of what's going on with the leadership of their country.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that certainly we've changed. We've seen from Obama, on through Trump now, we've seen a very different change in the way politics are done these days. Obama was one of the first guys to really embrace social media, I think, and that benefited him tremendously. Trump has had his own different way he's approached things, and that's benefited him. And I think, it's nice to have a little bit of better insight, because if you listen to Fox News, MSNBC, depending on which your flavor you prefer, it got really tiring to me to hear nothing about neo-Nazis and pedophiles. This is what these people are, all neo-Nazis and these people are all pedophiles. And I was like, this is not helpful. It doesn't help me make, I understand you hate everybody. And there's people that's what their job is, to stir up venom and hatred and social media. Again, a lot of people get a lot of clicks and views when they you wouldn't believe what this person said, and look how stupid this person is, and that's the game that's being played there. And so it takes some level of restraint to figure out that that's what that is, and not to get washed up in that stuff, because it's very easy to get. I remember during COVID, looking through social media, I would be pissed off all the time because I was like, this is so friggin' infuriating, but it wasn't good for me. It wasn't helping me on a personal level. I had my opinions and beliefs, and it's easy to sway that. And, we see how these algorithms work, where they hey, if you like this fear porn, we're going to send you more. We're going to give you a double dose tomorrow. And then you just get spun up, and then all of a sudden we can kind of manipulate you. And so you have to be wary of how social media can influence you. We know. You've seen the movies and the films.
And the capitalization of what we talked about. You want to find the truth, kind of just trace the money a little bit. We saw the investments and the funds of Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson skyrocket. We saw the people that were investing in that. We see that a typical political servant is making roughly $100,000 to $300,000 a year, and Then we see the investment fund from someone like Nancy Pelosi and her husband, who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars now, which doesn't really equate to the yearly salary that she's gaining from her service. And so there's a lot of red flags associated with the monetization and following of the money. And my last exploration with you, Shawn, is I thought it was pretty brave and pretty cool that RFK went independent. And do you think that that campaign is an actual threat to the two-party system? Because we saw, when you look at, the red, especially in places like California and New York, based on the election numerical values, I mean, you're starting to see California potentially shift a little bit. People were tired of the BS. We saw the challenges with how the fires were handled within California and the pushback against Governor Gavin Newsom. Do you think that there's a little bit of a threat to the two-party system in relation to the American democracy?
Well, I mean, the last independent president we had was George Washington. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that's the only time we've had it. Ross Perot got kind of close in the 80s, I think. I might have had like 20% or something like that. Really hard to come away from that system. I don't know that. I mean, certainly you saw what happened to RFK. They basically banned him from debates. They basically tanked him. They tried to pull him off states. And so I think there's an appetite. I mean, I consider myself an independent. I'm not attached to any political party. I've got certain, I identify with some on some and some on others. But I don't know. I mean, we've been with this Republican Democrat thing since the late 1800s, and we've had some minor parties, the Whigs and the Bull Moose Party of Teddy Roosevelt, and some of these other things that have come and gone throughout the years. I do think there's a shift. I mean, there's certainly a shift, and I think there's a more populist sort of bent that people are like tired of getting ripped off. And when you start hearing that billions, if not trillions, of your tax dollars over the years have been just literally, wasted or embezzled or whatever, I mean, it's hard not to get frustrated with that stuff. And hopefully, there'll be enough transparency within government, which I think Musk is trying to do. And again, I know he has his critics that think that he's maliciously stealing data and using it for his own particular personal benefit. I think he's less likely to do it because he's already the wealthiest guy on earth. I mean, what does he need more money for, really? I don't think that the two-party system is going to collapse anytime soon. Now, we may see some major value shifts in alignment within those parties. I mean, I think right now the Democratic Party is in tatters right now, from what I understand. They're sort of clinging to the things that clearly lost in the election, sort of making these crazy statements. I think certainly the mood of the country tends to veer more, I don't know if I want to say even Republican, but more populist. And I think Trump really represents, I think he's not really Republican anymore. I think based on what Republicans were 20 years ago, I mean, he's his own thing. And I think a lot of people are attaching themselves to that and saying, whether it's MAGA, MAHA, populism, let's clean up the swamp, that type of stuff. So, but to say that we're, let's just say, maybe 2036, we now have 5 major candidates that all equally have a chance, like they do in like the European Parliament and the Canadian system. I don't know if we can go to that. I mean, we might, but I would bet. If I were a betting man, I wouldn't say so. I think we're going to be locked in a two-party system for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, we'll have more transparency, and we'll get. I think what Elon said the other day was really, really insightful. Is to say, if the elected representatives can't do their job, we don't have a democracy. We have a bureaucracy, and I think we have to get rid of the bureaucracy, which is all these unelected people that are setting all the rules. And none of us voted for that. So I think that makes sense.
It's very well said, man. You're so insightful. And, I'll kind of summarize my thoughts on that, which is just because Make America Healthy Again sounds like Make America Great Again and is associated with a party, health is the greatest wealth. Without that, everything else falters. I loved that RFK said, when you have an issue with your health, you have one dream. When you have your health, you have many dreams. And I think if people can kind of hold on to that construct and realize that the American flag is representative of the beautiful country that we live in, and the unity, the connection, the collaboration, the rags to riches, and in pursuit of stretching and flexing our strengths and trying our best to create a beautiful story, not just attach to a tribe, fall in love with being on a side, and then attacking everybody else that's no longer in alignment. I think it's beautiful that people can disagree, but somewhere within the messy middle needs to be love and respect for the other side based on value systems, upbringing, and the various lenses that people possess within their own unique human experience. And so I loved what you had to say today. Do you have any final wrap-up thoughts based on our conversation today, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just echo a little bit what you said about the health, and I think I would say unashamedly that America, United States, is the best country on planet Earth. I mean, and probably has ever existed. I mean, I think based on our values, what we were founded upon, I think that we have the potential to be far greater than we've ever been. And I look at all the resource, I look at all the the brain power we have. That we should be a nation of vigorously healthy people, as opposed to what we currently are, which is a profoundly sick nation. And I think that is something that we have to emphasize. And you're absolutely right. Health is wealth. Health is the probably, when we talk about the pursuit of happiness, there is no happiness without health. And I think this is something that we have to prioritize. And I think, Kennedy finally doing this, hopefully successful. But again, we can't make America healthy again if Americans don't want to get healthy. And I think this is something we have to reach out. It has to be a grassroots thing. I mean, as much as Kennedy is going to get pushback from the companies and the corporations that don't want to go along with what he's doing, ultimately what's going to move the needle is market. And we are the market. And when what we say actually eventually goes. And if we say, I'm no longer going to support this garbage, then that's what's going to happen. So I think we have to do it ourselves. We can't, like what Kennedy said in his, initially in the 60s, he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think by being healthy, by forcing the issue in yourself and your family, that's how we rise to the potential that we can be as a nation.
Thanks for doing this, man. There you have it, everybody. Wise words from Dr. Shawn Baker. Shawn, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me, first of all, if you're sick and you need a doctor that can help you with this stuff, Revero.com, Revero.com. I'm on social media at Instagram, Shawn Baker 1967. So it's SHAWN. I'm on YouTube at Shawn Baker MD. I'm on Facebook, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on X, S Baker MD. That's where I'm at.
Very cool, man. Guys, if you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Shawn Baker today, please rate, review, subscribe, and as always, share with your friends. Stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time, guys.